Alright, here we are. Let's get ourselves animating our flag and making it look far more cool. So, we're looking at the default start window for Blender. Everything should look the same. The only thing I've added is down here is my little screencast key so you can see what I'm doing with my mouse and my keyboard. So what we're going to do, as with most of our Blender projects, is we're going to get rid of what they've given us. So we're going to make sure our mouse is in this window. We're going to hit A once, deselect everything, hit A again to select everything, hit delete on the keyboard, and then click on delete. It's all gone. That's what we're looking for here. Now, before we get started, we do need to add in, or rather turn on an add-in that Blender already has. So we're going to go up to the top, we're going to go to File, and then User Preferences. And up here is a search box. We're going to type in Images. Should only be one. Import images as planes. It's currently grayed out. We're going to check it like that. That's all we need to do. Now I should point out there are a lot of add-ons in here. Don't just go down and turn them all on. This is an excellent way to crash Blender and make it essentially unusable. Okay, so now that we're back here, what that plugin that we've just turned on does is it allows us to take an image that we've created or we've downloaded and insert it into our Blender world as a flat plane, as a mesh, which we can then play with. So that's exactly what we're going to do. If we hit Shift A now, as well as our planes and our cubes and our circles and our monkeys, is images as planes. So if we select that, I'm going to navigate to the image of my flag here, my Canadian flag, and I'm going to hit Import Images as Planes. Excellent. There it is. There's our flag. I know right now it just looks like a plain gray, boring, flat piece of nothing. But once we get going, you'll quite quickly see it turn into a flag. So let's get this thing turned more into a flag. Now the first thing we want to do, as you can tell, it's lying down. So there's a couple of ways of rotating this so that it's upright. I'm going to hit R to rotate it, and then I'm going to hit X so that it only rotates around that wonderful X axis. And I'm going to keep turning until that number in the bottom left says right around 90 degrees, and I'm going to let go so it's standing up. If I want to make doubly sure that's sitting at 90 degrees, I'm going to hit N on the keyboard, open up our numbers panel, right? And I can change this rotation number. I was really close with 90.515 to 90 exactly, and now it's right upright. All right, and we're going to hit N again, and the number panel goes away. Now, we've got a bit of a problem. If you look at this, and if I go into edit mode, it's going to be really easy. You'll see it in a second. I'm going to hit tab on the keyboard to go into edit mode, and you'll see, well, it's not actually very much of a mesh. It's just four vertices with edges between them. So when we give this to the cloth simulator, it's going to behave like a piece of wood. So instead, we need to start giving it some mesh in here to fill it in. First thing we want to do is we want to add a loop cut, which is basically to slice something all the way through. So I'm going to click on loop cut over here. Oops, if I can do it, loop cut over here, and then kind of put my mouse from the midpoint of the top to get that nice pink line. I'm going to click, and then we can slide this around to decide where we want the loop cut to go, but I'm going to drop it right smack bang where I left it, right in the middle. So what this does is give us two squares. And the reason why it does this is it's going to make it look more realistic down the road if the simulator is actually working with two squares rather than one giant rectangle. Okay, so then what we can do, we need to select the whole shape here. So once again, A, select nothing, A, select everything, and then W on the keyboard, and then subdivide. And now what this is going to do is if it's basically putting extra cuts in, right? And so right now it says 10. I'm going to crank this up. Sorry, 1. So it does say 10, which will give us 20 squares by 10 squares, which it would probably work. Might look a little bit clunky, a little bit not quite accurate. So I'm actually going to go W again and subdivide one more time to give us, this will be 40 across the top and 20 down. Yeah, far more realistic. You could go more. I could subdivide this again, and it would look more and more realistic, but it would also take more and more render time to complete and potentially end in a crashed Blender. So we don't want that. I think that this 40 by 20 should look good enough, I think. So once that's done, we can get back out of edit mode by hitting tab, and while nothing still looks like our boring our boring gray slab, it's actually got all those wonderful vertices and edges that we will use to make our cloth. Alright, so let's get some cloth going on here. So I've just stuck ourselves in edit mode. I'm going to hit tab already to get out. And we need to go over here to the right hand side, and the one we want is this little bouncing ball tab here for our physics. And if we select on cloth, well, nothing happens just yet, but now it's going to pretend that this is made of cloth, which is great. If I just hit Alt-A to animate it, you will, however, notice it just falls straight through the world and will keep going. Well, it'll keep going forever, actually. So instead, I'm going to bring it all back here, and we need to actually figure out how we're going to attach it. So what we need to do is we need to pin some of these vertices here so that they don't fall. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach, or pin rather, this left-hand side of vertices right along the edge there, because that's going to be where it's attached to the flagpole. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to assign those to a group and say, hey, these are all the vertices we're going to work with. In order to do that, we need to go to the Object tab, which is the little triangle, Object Data tab, the triangle of dots there. And you'll see there's an option for Vertex Group. So I'm going to add a vertex group. It decides to call it a group, unimaginatively. I'm going to call it pinned group. Slightly more exciting. So now what I want to do is I'm going to select the vertices that I want to do, hit A to deselect everything, and then if you hold down Alt and click on this edge, if I can hit it or not, I should get it instead. If I want to do it with a box here, I'm going to hit B for a box, and I can just drag down and select. Nope, didn't quite do it. This is when those wonderful views come in handy. There we go. I'm going to hit B and grab those. I'm going to make sure this is 1 and assign. I'm saying this is the group called pinned group on the side there. Out of edit mode, I can go back to my cloth settings, and there's a checkbox for pinning. I turn this on, it's going to say, okay, which vertices am I working with? Well, it's obvious to me. We're going to call the one that says pinned group. Now if I animate it with Alt-A, those vertices stay where they are, and the rest of the flag flops around like it's made of cloth. So there is our cloth animation. Now you can look at some of the settings here. There are some presets built in. I can go with something thicker, like a leather or leather flag if you really wanted to, and it kind of just sits where it is. That's not that exciting. I go for a cotton cloth, which is what most of the flags are made out of, and it actually kind of behaves like what we saw. Or if I want to, return back here, I can go for a really soft silk cloth, and it actually drapes rather nicely there around my imaginary flagpole. So that's how to do that. The next step, we're going to add ourselves a flagpole so that it doesn't just look like our flag is hanging there, and then we can get into making this look a little bit more like a flag and a little bit less like a gray box. Alright, so we have a couple of tweaks here we want to make it a little more realistic before we carry on. You'll notice right now if we animate it, not only does it kind of flop down, it also goes through itself, which is not what we want. So what we need to do is go over here in our cloth settings to cloth collision, open that up, and then select self collision. And what this does is that it actually allows it to hit itself rather than go through itself. If I animate it now, it sort of crumples up and doesn't go through itself as much. You might notice a little bit, but it's the nature of working in Blender like this. So one more thing we need to do, if you notice, if you animate your flag, it just kind of hangs, which is not all that exciting. So Instead, what I'm going to do is add some wind in to keep it upright. So I'm going to go over here, um, right sort of to the left of our flag, and we're going to add in instead of a mesh. We should be able to go to force field, and we're going to add in some wind. Now, a couple of things. You'll notice this one is actually, the arrow is up. That's the direction the wind is going to go. We want to spin that around. So we're going to rotate it along its y-axis, the yellow axis. R for rotate, Y for the y-axis, and we're going to face it approximately so that it is at 90 degrees. Once again, if you want to hit the number keypad or the number panel, check it exactly, make that 90 degrees, then we're all good with that. And then we're going to sort of just slide it so that it is hitting that flag. It doesn't actually matter where it is, but for me, with my detail-oriented way of looking at things, I need to have it. Now, if I hit animate, you'll notice it doesn't look like anything's changing. It turns out it is. You just can't see it. The reason for this is that the wind amount, the default is 1. Now we actually want it to be closer to, say, 100 here. And then if we let it animate again, you'll see a little bit of wind. What if we went to 200 here and stop the animation and go again? You should see it's starting to flap around, right? Now we're just going to crank that up. Let's go overboard. Let's go to 1,000 right there. Back, animate again. And it should start to stand up. There we go, like it's flapping in some sort of wind. Not a very fast wind, but there you go. I could always, crank this up to 2,000 if I needed to. And you have to restart the animation. Change it here. Let's reanimate it with Alt-A. And there we go. Now we're talking. There's a flag. We can actually... looks like a flag, doesn't it? There we go. Alright, so now that we've kind of got this nearly ready, I'm going to just get this set up so you can see your finished product and maybe start to imagine what you're going to do with it next. So we've got our flag set up, it's all animated, the physics are done. We've got our wind set up, so that's going to affect your flag. But in order to actually see anything, we need a couple more things. One, we need a light, and two, we obviously need a camera. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to add that light in, which is going to come somewhere up here, I think. I'm going to view the camera, or view the flag rather, from this position. So I want to put the light behind the camera, or at least the same side of the flag as the camera so you can see the front. So it's up there. I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to add myself a lamp, which I'm going to add myself a sun. By default, the sun comes straight down, which will sort of work, but won't really look quite right. I'm going to actually have the sun so that it's pointing right at our flag. So I'm going to rotate it along the red or x-axis. R for rotate, X for x-axis, until it's hitting the flag, right, like that. And then, one last thing I need, I'm actually going to add the camera right there and then drag it down. I'm going to add a camera. And right off the bat, I'm going to grab and move it down the Z-axis, the up and down axis, so that it's sort of there. And then I'm going to rotate it around that the Z-axis, so that it's pointing approximately at my flag. And then if I hit the 0 on my keypad, my number pad rather, I can actually right-click and drag so that I have it in the center of the frame. Oops, right-click and then left-click to save that setting. So now we've got that pointing where we want it. This means now if I hit F12 and render it, I actually see a flag. In this case, a Canadian flag, all nicely lit. Hasn't done anything yet, it's just a still image. But if I then do an Alt-A animation to start the animation and then hit Alt-A again to freeze it, now I hit F12, you can see it's halfway through its animation cycle. So by itself, it's just a flag hanging in the middle of nowhere. Escape out of there, go back to the beginning. There is one other element. I'm going to select our light right off the bat, and one of the things we can do is add in some sky. And there are some presets. Classic is always good. It looks like to me like a sky anyway. I don't think we really need to worry about much else. It means when you render it, though, it's sitting in a sky and not just a black void. All right. So if you really want to render the animation at this point, I will. I'll cut it in here. I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me render it, but you can kind of see the beginnings of where we want to go. All right, and this is our final product. You can see where we're going with it here. You can see the animation. If you want to go ahead, add yourself a flagpole. Maybe change the wind qualities a little bit, wind strength. Change the cloth properties, make it thicker or thinner cloth. You can go and do that. It's entirely up to you from here on out. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing your work.